Steven Crowder, Daily Wire, the latest. The 30,000-foot overview for those of you who didn't watch yesterday and don't know what's going on. A few days ago, Steven Crowder put out a tweet, said, "I'm done being quiet." The obvious joke being, when has Steven Crowder ever been quiet? Comes out with a video yesterday or the day before. I might be off on the date, doesn't really matter. A video detailing what he believes to be soft censorship or collusion with big tech censorship of conservative voices coming from an unnamed party based on a contract that Steven Crowder was negotiating or had stopped negotiating with this third party subsequent to his announcement that he's leaving the Blaze. Steven Crowder was on the Blaze, Louder with Crowder, Mug Club. Everybody knows Steven Crowder. He's awesome. Content-wise, awesome. Even if you don't always agree with it, even if it's not your method of doing things, awesome. Was on the Blaze, not renewing his contract. You know, typically at this level, it's because of money, and there's no shame in that. People are entitled to get paid what they're worth and not make money for other people without making money for themselves. Announces he's not renewing with the Blaze. Alex Stein, Primetime 99, Pimp on a Blimp, or Shrimp on, whatever, it's Pimp on a Blimp. He's coming onto the Blaze, so you know they'll retain that market of niche content. Starts looking to contract with other parties, and then gets outraged by negotiations he had with an unnamed party, but everybody knew it was the Daily Wire. He didn't mention it when he went through the contract and said, look at this there. It's exploitive. It's unduly punitive on content creators. It seeks to censor them. It basically says if YouTube or other platforms demonetize your content, that we pay you less under the contract. And people were rightly, based on that information at that stage of the discussion, rightly enraged. Crowder comes out with a contract. It's redacted the names that basically says, if you get demonetized on YouTube, we're going to pay you 25% less than what we owe you under the contract. If you get demonetized on Spotify, 10%, Apple, 20%, I don't know, whatever it is. There was a whole section. And he says, look, this is a conservative outlet that prides itself, that promotes itself on being free speech, supporting independent thought. And now I've seen behind the curtains, and they exploit their creators. They make them work exorbitant amounts. They give them onerous terms of contract that penalize them if they're sick, if they miss a day, that onerous terms of contract that penalize them if they get demonetized subsequent to flagging, brigading, whatever, and then seeks to pass the buck of the penalty onto the creator, thus doing YouTube's censorship and bidding for them. And he's not entirely wrong in that assessment to some extent. Everybody knew it was the Daily Wire, although it wasn't confirmed, which, some people say to Crowder's credit, he didn't name the party. But if we want to argue both sides of that, steelman both sides of it, yes, he didn't name the party, even though everybody knew who he was talking about. Also, not naming the party is not necessarily even more fair, because he probably couldn't due to confidentiality provisions. Not naming the party is not necessarily all that much better, because it causes suspicion among the community at large. Was he talking about he couldn't have been talking about Rumble, because Rumble was one of the platforms in the contract that they would have, monetized his content. Was he talking about OAN, Fox News? So it creates suspicion within the community, other than making accusations publicly, which the fights should be fights among allies, among ideological allies to some extent, should be fought privately. There's the old expression, compliment publicly, criticize privately. So not naming the party, it's a double-edged sword. Some could say everybody knew who you were talking about. By not naming them, you were still naming them. Others can say by not naming them, you're creating suspicion at large, which is not fair to the other non-implicated parties, whatever. So Steven Crowder puts out this video and starts a website called Stop the Con, predicated on the notion that purported conservative outlets are actually working hand in hand with social media, big tech censorship, to censor independent voices through the terms of that contract. Well, yesterday, the Daily Wire comes out with their video and says, yeah, it's us. Yeah, that's our contract. And yeah, we think it's a good contract, and we don't think we've done anything wrong. And they put out, what's my problem here? They put out a 52-minute video, which I've now watched twice. Once to understand, and twice to timestamp, so I could actually pull up the relevant sections. And they put out, I say, like, you may not You may not be convinced or swayed by it, but they put out a rather compelling, a rather defensible position. On the one hand, they allege that Crowder just misunderstood certain provisions of the contract. And on the other hand, they also say, dude, they do some things which they're not dirty. They're moves that they're allowed to make because Crowder, did what Crowder not pulled the first punch, but Crowder made the first move. So they're playing chess now. Like you had a set table of chess, and it's like, okay, well, I'll play you if you play. Oh, I don't really want to play. I'm tired. Oh, well, I just moved first, so now I get to move. Now we're in a game of chess. This is influence chess, social media chess, and at the end of the day, business chess. Because at the end of the day, this comes down to money to some extent, and not in a cynical, unjust way, just in a realistic. Nobody's running charities here. Not Steven Crowder, not Daily Wire. So Crowder moved first, and one could have anticipated what's going to be the next move. Well, Daily Wire comes out. I forget the guy's name. Joseph. Oh, yeah, Joseph Boring. That's an unfortunate name. Or we'll call him Baring. He comes out now because Crowder made the first move. Baring comes out and says, look, this is our contract. We don't need people to defend us for this. We're proud of it. And by the way, we were offering Crowder $50 million over 4 years and $25 million for a renewal of 2 years if we decide to renew. That $50 million, just so nobody says Viva is being disingenuous, that $50 million is not like net to Crowder. That $50 million is so that Crowder can produce his own show that the Daily Wire would have intellectual propriety ownership over during the term of the contract. So like they say, Crowder says, look, I don't want you guys producing my show. I want to produce it. I have my team. I have my style. I have everything. I'll produce it. You give me $50 million a year. I will guarantee, sorry, not $50 million a year, $50 million over 4 years. I will assume the costs of producing, employing everything, my own show. And I will deliver to you 192 shows a year. And if it costs Crowder, the margins here, depending on who you ask, will vary. If it costs Crowder 20% to produce the show, well, then that's 80% that in theory Crowder and others split. If it costs him 50% to produce the show, well, then that's 50. And whatever it is, if there's $2 million left over for the annual $12.5 million for production of the show, the 192, that goes to Crowder. I've heard varying estimates as to what the costs of production of Crowder's show would have been, but that's it. So now Daily Wire comes out and they get to say, look, it's our contract. We like it. And by the way, no one mentioned it before. We had offered Crowder $50 million. And then there were some other odds and ends in there to produce his own show, 192 a year, along with other stuff. We get to monetize his channel and content during the agreement. We get to monetize his old content during the agreement, but after the agreement, that old content reverts back to Crowder. We get to monetize social media platforms that we create during the context of this agreement. We own the content that he creates during this agreement. So Crowder, here's $50 million. You may not be an employee, you might be a subcontractor, whatever, but your work product for the duration of this agreement, where we pay you $50 million a year to produce it, belongs to us. Some of you might not like these terms. And in which case, the obvious thing would be, thank you, but no thank you. I don't agree to this, and let's move on. Hold on, let me just get to the notes. So where there were particular issues were the penalties that would result from potential demonetization, because Daily Wire is saying, we get to monetize all the content. We own the content you create under the terms of this agreement. We get to monetize what you created before, but you will own it after the agreement. But if you get demonetized, or if your content ceases being monetizable on certain platforms because of the things you say, we're going to apply certain penalties. And it was 25% for YouTube, 10% but bottom line, it doesn't matter what the numbers are. If it gets demonetized on Spotify or canceled, if it gets demonetized elsewhere, Daily Wire is going to apply a penalty because we're paying you $50 million so that we can monetize your content during the term of the agreement. If we can no longer monetize it, we can't pay you we're not going to pay you the amount that we guaranteed to pay you on the basis that we could monetize it and therefore recoup the investment of the $50 million. Like it or don't like it, that's the idea, and it's not irrational. It actually kind of makes decent business sense. The issue is, as some are making a compelling argument, is the Daily Wire doing the censorship for YouTube? In the video, Jeff says, look, we're not taking that money away from them. YouTube is. Well, that's 6 of one way, half a dozen the other, because YouTube takes it away, then you take it away. So it kind of is you doing it for YouTube. The question is, though, is that actually suppressing free speech? Are they trying to lock Crowder in so they can then slowly whittle down his independent voice, control the content that he creates, so on and so forth? Well, I really brought that screen up too early because I want to go back to Rumble and just see what the chat's saying there. I think that's a fair assessment. I think that's a fair assessment. Let me see here. 50 million over 4 years, correct. 50 million over 4 years. 50 million. If I said 50 million a year, I think I said that by accident. It's 50 million over 4 years plus 25 million for a 2-year renewal at the sole discretion of Daily Wire. Okay. Go watch Rekieta Law. He has a different opinion of the scope of the contract. Well, I didn't get to watch Rekieta Law. I watched Barnes, and Barnes makes a very, very compelling argument, which I'm going to get to in a second. And then we're going to discuss it Sunday night. Okay. The monetization is the issue. Daily Wire knows YouTube demonetizes Crowder a lot. Well, M.K. Geiger, 1968, that's a fair point. We're going to get to it because the Daily Wire addresses it. Some people are saying, well, Crowder's already demonetized on YouTube, so it makes no sense. And the guy, well, let me get to that part of the video. I took notes again, people. Gosh darn it. I don't remember where the part of... He said, we understand that, and it wouldn't make sense for Crowder to start signing a contract that starts off with a 25% penalty. So these were negotiations that can go back and forth, because I have a sneaking suspicion, and as much as that contract was long and thoroughly drafted, there's a lot of boilerplate provisions in it that you negotiate afterwards. And the guy from Daily Wire's ultimate point was, this was our initial letter of intent, our initial offer, open-ended offer, where you don't commit to everything in the first draft. You certainly don't give everything the other party's asking in the first LOI. And we would have gone back and forth, not have Crowder do what he did, which probably burnt a lot of bridges. Speaker McCarthy, channel YouTube, offer to Crowder. Here we go. I'm going to go through the points of note that I took. And we'll get to it. And Barnes has a very, very good point, which Barnes is a smart guy. And beyond smart is an understatement. It's a thoroughly justified and supported position. It doesn't mean that there's no rebuttals to Barnes's arguments. So I suspect Barnes and Rekieta are espousing a similar view on this. Okay, so hold on. Let's just start off at the beginning here.
All right. Our friend Steven Crowder has launched a new initiative called Stop Big Con. And in the video announcing the launch of the project, he talked about leaving the blaze and all the different offers that he fielded from other conservative organizations and what he thought were the real problems with those offers. And that's led a lot of people to speculate about whether or not the Daily Wire is one of the people who made him an offer. In particular, are we the ones who made the offer that he put up on the screen and talked about at length? And
well, let me just start off with our friend. That's passive aggressive. Let's be. He's this guy. What's his name? Jeremy gives a very, very polished performance. He gives a polished presentation. This guy's not dumb. This guy didn't get to where he is by being dumb. I don't think he got to where he is by being dishonest either, because you only go so far in life by being dishonest. But starting off with our friend.
And
there are several elements of passive aggressiveness in here, but quite obvious, because I think he'd like to be aggressive if he could.
The answer is yes, that offer did come from the Daily Wire. I'm not trying to hide that fact. I'm not ashamed of that fact. In fact, I think it's a very good offer. But I think there's a lot of...
Well, so of course, he would think it's a good offer because they would make money and they would be able to minimize their risk. That's business. What did I get at
first?
5 minutes.
Here's the document, the non-binding confidential term sheet. I'm just going to walk you through it.
Non-binding, and he didn't mention confidential term sheet by accident. Non-binding confidential term sheet, and the argument is going to be whether or not, at the end of the video, he says, well, Crowder didn't sign, so there's no confidentiality binding the parties. He mentioned it. That also is another dig. 6 minutes. Oh, the 6 minutes we get the terms of the agreement. So this is for anybody who doesn't want to watch.
They're going to beat it up a little bit. They're going to say, well, this should be higher and this should be lower.
He's talking about the negotiations back and forth that would typically be had.
And you're going to come back and say, no, we're going to stand firm here, but we're willing to compromise there. And over time, you either get to a deal or you don't get to a deal. But that's how a good faith negotiation always works. 100% of every interaction I've ever had with any talent, that's the process. And so here we go. Here was our offer. A 4-year initial term with 2-year renewal at DW's sole discretion. That just means Steven's going to work for DW for 4 years. And if it's going really well, DW can retain him for an additional 2 years. 2, the fee. Remember, this is the minimum number that we thought would get the conversation started with Steven. $50 million for the initial term, plus $25 million for the renewal term, if extended, paid in monthly installments.
That was, you could hear the audio was a little different. That was edited over this. So that's the term. 8 minutes. They talk about content and monetization during the term.
Existing content. This just, again, Steven's going to produce his own content. It has to be as good as the stuff that Steven's audience has come to expect from him. And that'll come out of the 50 million. So it's not like all of that 50 million goes right in Steven's pocket. He's going to use some of it to pay for producers and
bottom line, so that nobody thinks this is 50 million for Crowder and then Daily Wire produces everything and Crowder's a big greedy bastard. 50 million over 4 years, but Crowder has to assume the costs of production. What happens here? There's something here.
For various reasons, right? He can disapprove of like 10% of the ones we bring in.
They're talking
he can
about
disapprove if he owns equity in a direct competitor of one of the advertisers that we bring him. But point D, if he doesn't read the requested ads within that framework, then the content that he made won't be counted as delivered under the contract, because it's all fine and good that he made a piece of content, but if we can't make any money off of it, then we're just paying him so that he can make a show. We're not paying him so that we can participate in any of the success of that show.
And so the idea here is he's got to do ad reads. He has the right to refuse 10% of the requested ad reads. He has the right, obviously, to refuse ad reads that are for competitors. And then he has to do the other ones. And if he doesn't do ad reads for other reasons that are not contractually provided, there'll be a reduction or a penalty, which makes sense because it makes sense to ask for this. And then you can negotiate back and forth. Like, okay, well, I get 10 freebies or whatever. This was the initial non-binding offer or letter of intent, however you want to call it. So, and I guess the main criticism from Jeremy is that there was no negotiation. Crowder got very angry at the initial offer, replied to him as such, and then went public without going public. I want to highlight this because he said, I find it offensive 4 times in the
subtract
video.
A little bit extra. And again, you pay somebody $50 million, you should get the work. Monthly and quarterly content, well, this is more valuable content and there's less of it, so the fee is higher, $250,000 if he misses that kind of content. Annual content, well, this is the most important, most expensive content. If you were supposed to have done a complete documentary this year and you didn't deliver it, well, we're going to subtract $1 million because that's one of the most important high-value pieces of content that we asked you to make that year.
And by the way, to explain that, in addition, so 50 million over 4 years, produce your own content, but he had other obligations for which, he would not be remunerated, which were included in that 50 million. And that is that he would have to produce a documentary and a comedy special, one special political, one special comedy a year for Daily Wire that they would take care of the marketing, the production costs for, but he'd have to do it as part and parcel of his 50 million. Over 4 years would be every year, 2 specials, political comedy. Daily Wire assumes the costs, advertising, production, everything, but he has to commit to it. And if he doesn't, $1 million penalty. Again, hey, these are not charities. This is not the issue in principle. This is not the basis of the ideological disputes between Crowder and Daily Wire, and we'll get to it.
And then D just says reset. The fee reduces each calendar year. So
okay, where does he say
every year you kind of start over? You start over fresh.
Now I think he says it.
That brings us to 13, reduction of fee from lost revenue or boycotts. Again, this is one of the points that Stephen really focused on. He says we're enforcers for big tech, that we're doing big tech's bidding, that we're punishing content creators if they run afoul of big tech. And first of all, that's just personally incredibly offensive.
Don't care.
Incredibly offensive to have your friend and ally in 10 years of fighting this fight alongside one another.
All that to say, nobody cares. It's not an argument. Being offended is not an argument. Especially, nobody cares about your feelings. Just to quote Ben Shapiro, or facts don't care about your feelings. I understand what he's doing. He's trying to humanize the dispute here. He's also probably is very offended at what happened. But he says, I found that offensive 4 times in this video, which I found that suspicious. But it doesn't matter. Do I need to go to... He says it again at... he said one good thing at 38, which is, I think, part of the disagreement here.
Continue to pay him guaranteed money, whether his show makes money or not. And then we lose the business as a result. And now no one pays Steven anything. And no one releases Steven's content. He has to go build it all from scratch in crisis. Ban. The Crowder content cannot be released on any of the major platforms because of his content being banned from those platforms. Then we'll reduce the fee if YouTube 20, if Apple 20, if Facebook 10, if Spotify 10. Same kind of concept. If the content simply cannot appear and therefore cannot not only be used for marketing, cannot be used to grow the brand, also can't be monetized, well, we can't pay him the same as if it was. If you're making 25% of your money on YouTube and now YouTube is permanently gone, you can't make that money anymore. It's not punishment. And this is really what it comes down to. Steven's philosophy seems to be, I deserve to be paid millions and millions and millions of dollars.
Maybe he does.
Whether my show drives the revenue or not.
Maybe he does. And maybe the revenue from other sources more than compensates for the YouTube. Maybe the, what's the word? The gravitational pulling of Crowder attracts other bodies to Daily Wire that more than compensate for whatever might be lost on YouTube. Those are negotiation questions. The issue here is the intent behind these issues. The issue here, the disagreement here, is the purported, presumed, or actual intent of these provisions, and that's what we're going to get to. But this is a very well, eloquently spoken sentiment.
That's not a business relationship. He's not looking for a business relationship. He's looking for a benefactor. The Daily Wire is not a nonprofit.
It's a good line. Like it or not, that's a good line. The idea that basically Daily Wire is saying, look, Crowder is coming in with the perspective that doesn't matter whether he's profitable or not, although I think he thinks and knows that he would be. He wants X amount of dollars regardless of whether or not we can make money off of his content. Crowder's going to say, you're going to make money off of other aspects, whether or not you make money off of monetization on YouTube, it's more than well worth it. Points for negotiation in contract negotiations. The issue here, and it's the one that Barnes and I presume Rekieta also brought up, is whether or not this is part and parcel of mainstream conservative media, and that being the Daily Wire, mainstream conservative media, not surreptitiously, but through the back door, directly, indirectly, deliberately, or accidentally, suppressing independent conservative voices. That's the issue. Why is Daily Wire doing it? Is Daily Wire doing it so they can rein in Crowder, suppress his speech, limit his content, guide his content, thus silencing one of the true few independent conservative voices? Because I consider myself to be true and independent, but maybe I'm being stubborn here. I don't consider myself to be conservative yet, although I take it as a compliment when people call me that. Viva, they want to control him, says DVR Denmark. But that's the question. And my retort, and I'm going to talk about it with Barnes on Sunday. In that video, Jeremy makes a very good point that whether or not he has to tame it down on YouTube. First of all, Crowder already does that to some extent. He is demonetized on YouTube, but he's still on the platform. And maybe he does not limit any content that he creates whatsoever simply to continue to remain on the platform. Maybe. I suspect he probably does. There's some jokes which he'll say, even though I've been demonetized, I still won't make those on YouTube. There's certain comments I won't make on YouTube because that'll just get me booted from the platform above and beyond already demonetized. Jeremy from the Daily Wire's argument in the video is, we don't want to silence him, suppress him, curtail what he has to say. In fact, the opposite. He's got a segment which I now know about called "Piss Off YouTube," or he had it on The Blaze. The idea that you say, hey guys, I can't make these jokes, I can't make this commentary on YouTube, so come to The Blaze or come to the Daily Wire, where I'm going to say what would otherwise piss off YouTube. That would be the retort, and in which case that's going to maybe put a stick in the spoke of that wheel of an argument that they're trying to control and limit what he has to say. If what they're saying is no, maybe on that platform, just to keep the biggest bullhorn to the biggest audience of 2 billion people while directing them over to the Daily Wire, where he can make his segments piss off YouTube. Shit I can't say on YouTube. It's a great idea for a segment. That's the retort. The problem here, and people don't, actually, let me before I even say the tribalistic arguments, but remind me if I forget. The problem here is that you're dealing with track records, you're dealing with histories, you're dealing with individuals, and Robert Barnes made an amazing point on vivabarneslaw.locals.com. You're dealing with an entity that has traditionally, the Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro, been pro-vax until they were not pro-vax, been pro-war, been anti-Trump, and anti-MAGA, pro-Trump candidates. And so, you're imputing intentions based on history and say, look, Shapiro has been consistently wrong on a number of things where he's limited the discussion. And this would be the Daily Wire's effort to take someone like Crowder, who has been vocally anti-vax, vocally pro-Trump, vocally critical of the election. What was the other one? Vocally critical of the war, and silence him, rein him in, tame him like a wild horse. Or maybe just don't get kicked off YouTube so that we can have access to 2 billion people and then defer them over to the Daily Wire. It's one of the reasons where in my my agreement with Rumble, it's not a question of just coming off YouTube and dropping the biggest market on earth, because that's where you need to not siphon the traffic. That's where you need to continue to generate the traffic from. Now, Barnes said it on Locals yesterday. I wouldn't have agreed to any of these terms either myself. I'm not in the figures of this, but I am in the freedom of this. I wouldn't want to be have these sort of Damocles hanging over my head, but I wouldn't have tolerated those conditions had I seen them. But it's not something like even Rumble understands. The freedom of expression is the idea. You don't come off the biggest platform and cut your nose off to spite your face out of principle. That's good for nobody. It's not even good for Rumble. So that is the discussion. Is it an indirect, surreptitious way for the Daily Wire to try to silence an independent voice? Or, as the Daily Wire is going to argue, is it a way to amplify that voice while creating parallel infrastructure to give that voice a safe platform? Come off YouTube, people. We're going to have the nasty show on the Daily Wire. Some people are very suspicious of Daily Wire Ben Shapiro because of their consistent historical positions, which have proven to be bad. Ben Shapiro has to come out now and, yeah, I got duped on the vax because I was relying on the experts. Well, being too deferential to the authorities is a problem to begin with, but whatever. That's the dispute. Where do I stand on this? I wouldn't have signed that contract. I genuinely think Crowder's way of going about this it was not the best way for his own best interest as well. Like the issue is, and I mentioned it yesterday, like an employee that shits on their former boss, especially when applying for a new job. Well, everybody's going to approach that employee with a great deal of skepticism. Anytime an employee poops on their former boss, the prospective employer knows that employee is going to do the same thing about them to another future boss. What Crowder's done is made public a private dispute, and it's going to be a deterrent, I presume, for other parties. And I'm speaking for nobody except for what my rationale would be as a strategist. It might be a very big deterrent for Fox News to engage with him if they ever would, or OAN. And so strategically, I don't like making private disputes public unless there's a damn good reason. Secondly, and it can allow people to cast aspersions on Crowder's intentions as well. Like making these accusations, it's not without people viewing it as a potential exploitive technique on its own. There are people who are going to say that Crowder's doing this to drum up the drama so he can get email lists of people to log on to his new platform, and that his intentions aren't pure. Once you start publicly impugning someone else's intentions, people are going to do that to you. And whether or not the contract was just exploitive, that Daily Wire is just playing it a little bit too safe by not pissing off the big tech overlords. That's a critique of the company. And if you don't like the company, you don't like the contract, don't go there. But to do this, I mean, the question is going to be, Right or wrong, does it make Crowder look good in the long run? And are people going to impugn Crowder's intentions to the same degree to which he's impugned the Daily Wire's? But as far as the concerns go, Barnes makes a damn compelling point. This could be a very subtle way of suppressing, silencing, reining in truly independent, provocative, conservative voices. And I can totally understand that. Now, I want to ask him about some of my questions later on, but there's a lot of super Rumble rants that I want to get to here. And I'm going to go backwards from bottom to top. I'll just start at the bottom here. He says he's exposing soul suckers from Beerus. Well, Meep Kid says, in the same argument, they say copy the same business model Crowder on Piss Off YouTube, kind of counter it. In the same argument, they say copy the same business model Crowder on Piss Off YouTube, kind of counter it. I think so. If what you mean by that is Piss Off YouTube as a concept on the Daily Wire counters the argument that they're kowtowing to YouTube censorship, I agree. Okay, then we got James JK1234. DW, Daily Wire needs to understand that there is a value add for Crowder. Well, I'm sure they do. It's not that they don't. Whether or not they're getting greedy is another question. $50 million, $75 million over 6 years, plus they assume production costs for the documentaries, which they make money off of course, plus they assume advertising costs for all of Crowder's content, which they make money off of and Crowder doesn't. They're just trying to figure out a way to make money off their investments. That's not sacrilegious. They most likely do understand this provision should be considered insulting, even everything they know. DW is obviously money first. Taking an offer that you don't like as an insult, look, you know what it's going to get you? It'll maybe make you do something rash that will not be in your best interest in the long run, and it just causes fights among people who should be working together and not fighting each other. You find it insulting? Take a little pill, take a nap, chill out, and then go back to negotiating. With the idea that you negotiate and everything you don't like is an insult, well, it's a juvenile way of approaching business negotiations. You might be insulted. Okay. And to use the quote, offense is taken, not given. You find it insulting? How dare they not offer me $100 million? A, maybe check yourself. And B, maybe just take a deep breath and say, that's good. I'm insulted. Get over it. Go back to negotiating. Rob A. Viva, would you take $50 million over 4 years, the rest to be negotiated? Or is that figure too low? Let's just assume I even had the $50 million. My concern for that amount of money is that people think they own you. Like $50 million. I mean, geez Louise. The other thing is, how much money do you need in your life? 192 episodes a year for what he does? It's a shit ton of work. I don't know what his family situation is like. I don't know what his personal life is like. 192 Crowder episodes a year, plus a documentary, plus a comedy special, plus appearances, plus all the stuff. I mean, Jesus, I don't know what would be left in his life for that amount of money. Maybe it's worth it. I don't know. But for good or for bad, I don't have those problems to deal with. Kenzie 67 $5 Rumble Rant says LWC Louder with Crowder has a base of over 6 million. He is a sure bet. He smells merch and mug. He sells merch and mug club. He wasn't looking for an offer. He just checked it out. Crowder was speaking up for small, younger creators. Get it? I get it. 6 million subs, 6 million followers. What do you think the conversion rate percentages of followers to paid subscribers? 6 million subs is good. It's free, Kenzie. So what do you think is the realistic conversion rate of percentage wise? You have 1 million subs and you say, guys, it's going behind a paywall. How many do you think join you there? 5%? Way too much. By Barnes' own assessment, it's 1 to 2%, which is still big. It's 300,000. Or sorry, if it's 1 to 2%, 300,000 is, the hell's my problem? I'm going to embarrass myself. It's even at 1 to 2%, it's a lot. But what do you think the conversion rate? 6 million free subs does not convert. It's not 50%. It's not 20%. It's not 10%. It's 5% at most generous, and it's 1 to 2% realistically. Still a lot. But then negotiate. What's the use of blowing up the ship? What's the use of blowing up the ship and imputing the illest of intentions to the Daily Wire? Genkin says he wouldn't be punished, just penalties will apply. That makes it better. It's a penalty. If you don't do what you're contractually bound to do, and you've agreed to a penalty for not doing what you're contractually bound to do, what do you think should happen? If you don't like the provision, don't sign it. This is Genkin $10. If you don't like it, don't sign it. If you sign it, don't complain about it. But don't complain about something that you didn't negotiate back and forth and you didn't agree to. Oh, it's terrible. Imagine the Daily Wire wants to find ways to hedge their bets, make more money. Imagine that. Okay, Genkin, $10 says, basing penalties on actions from third parties that do not sign the contract and nobody on the contract have control over is beyond insulting. It's funny for a crowd that always says, "No, facts don't care about your feelings." A lot of people are invoking insult, etc. The idea that they would say, if we cannot monetize so as to recoup our investment in you, we should split some of those some of those risks. You can consider it insulting. Okay. Is the idea now that when anyone engages in a contract that has an insulting provision, they're going to F off and go public and make a public spectacle out of it? There is probably room to negotiate, especially since he was already demonetized on YouTube. So the idea of a 25% penalty didn't make sense to begin with. It was probably in there from a template provision from a previous contract. Oh, it's beyond insulting? Oh, okay. Well, I didn't realize we were all very sensitive. And in negotiation of contracts for $50 million deals, we could just say it's beyond insulting. I'm walking away. I'm flipping the table over. Let me see if I missed any other ones here. So that's okay. We got I'm Not Your Buddy guy says, if you ask me, a part of me ponders that the Daily Wire never intended to bring Crowder on, but wanted to put an offer out there they hoped he would reject so they could at least say they tried to help a friend. I don't think that's a realistic interpretation given what we see to be the terms of that agreement. $75 million over 6 years. I do wonder what Crowder's production costs are, because that is the important factor in all of it, obviously. No more Trudeau. I already puked. Okay, good. So Space Power Monkey says, yes, if you turn in total bullshit with 50 million on it, then they should walk out on you while laughing really hard. Let me see. If you turn in total bullshit with 50 million on it, they should walk out on you while laughing real hard. Peacemaker says, why not make it public when someone acts this shady? Peacemaker, I'm curious, what do people think is so shady about this? These are almost standard. You may not like them, but they're almost standard provisions. If someone's going to claim monetization over your channel, and then it's subsequently, let's just hypothetically say, let's take an example that will be less difficult to accept. So they take over a monetized channel, and the person comes out on that channel and just does nothing but scream racial expletives for 30 minutes. Oh, okay. Well, there it's deliberate. There you're deliberately doing what you know will get you demonetized. Do you think that someone who agreed to pay you on monetizing your channel would have to assume that cost? Like, you could take very extreme examples just to make it a little more easy to digest. They say we're gonna pay you excessive amounts of money, and how we're gonna make that money back is by monetizing your content. If you deliberately sabotage the monetizability of your content, I think we would agree that they could apply a provision. Okay. So we can agree on that. Maybe not. Maybe say like, I'm locked in for whatever, and I can say the most terrible things that I know are totally against the rules. I don't think most people are going to agree with that. So we agree you can't do it deliberately. But now if they do it, for politically motivated reasons, then you should deal with that. Let's say we agree with that. Okay, they'll say fine. We will assume all risk of demonetization everywhere. Do you think the offer should still be 50 million? Or do you think they would say, okay, well, we'll do that. We're going to guarantee you nothing, no hinging, no hedging, no nothing, but it's not going to be 50 million. Let's just say they come up with 25 million to Crowder over 4 years and no risk whatsoever for Crowder. None of that. Well, that's way too much less than the original offer. But if they're going to assume that risk, it's going to be factored into the amount they're going to pay him, period. And that's normal. That's where you'd have negotiations. You say, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not stupid. You know that my stuff gets demonetized all the time. Why would I assume that risk? That's what I'm coming here for, to avoid. Okay, well, we'll do it, but it's going to be 45 million or 40 million, not 50 million. The press is wrong, Bob. Snicker Fritz. Even worse off. And so that's it. So the issue is it's gotten so tribalistic that the second someone disagrees with another party, even though, in theory, you may not agree with everything Ben Shapiro says. I don't agree with his position on gay marriage. I think it's absolutely, I won't say archaic because it's a religious concept. I disagree with it. Disagree with it in substance. I'm not sure, if Ben would say I agree with civil union, but don't call it marriage because marriage in the Bible is a man and a wife, etc. Whatever. You can disagree with an individual and still be ideologically aligned in the long run. The problem here is everyone has gotten so tribal. The second someone does something that you disagree with, immediately have to go to the most ill intentions in order to demonize everything. Do I think the Daily Wire is out there to soft censor independent conservative voices? No. Do I think someone can look at this contract and see that as a potential risk? Yes. Do I think it's an actual risk? No. I don't see that in reading that contract. Everything that Crowder wanted to do that would have gotten him demonetized off YouTube, he could have done in the same way he was doing with Piss Off YouTube on another platform. The real risk there, however, is, as we've seen elsewhere, come off YouTube and go to a website where we're doing things that we can't do on YouTube. I do wonder if at some point in time, YouTube is going to start penalizing people on the platform for non-offensive examples of doing that. Like, I want to talk about election fornication. Go to my Substack or go to my locals, and YouTube is going to say, "Oh, you can't promote that on YouTube. That's against our terms. Now we're going to yeet you." But I did not see the hands being tied for censorship in the way that some people do. But I've been wrong before, and I'll be wrong again. And maybe I'm wrong here, but I think it requires knowing intentions that we don't yet know. And do I think that Daily Wire censors Candace Owens? No. Were they, like Barnes notes, though? However, they did not like the Kanye West incident with Candace Owens. But anyhow, that's it. That's the contract. The issue is when you fight, and this is my fundamental belief, when you fight publicly, nobody comes out looking good. Very rarely does any one party come out looking totally good, totally clean, totally proper. Deal with that as you may, people. That is my opinion. You do not have to agree with me. And I hope that you do not always agree with me, because that would be weird. Xander Shade Zero says, additionally, Jeremy shits on Crowder, claiming that he doesn't understand business, then in the same breath admits that he's not the biggest he's the biggest conservative creator, including then in the same breath admits that he's the biggest conservative creator, including Daily Wire. Yeah, I did think that, him saying Crowder's not a businessman, or doesn't understand business is pretty stupid. I mean, it's juvenile because it's stupid. I mean, Crowder understands business. Crowder understands business, or he wouldn't have been presented with a $75 million offer over 6 years. He's not just like a Picasso that can only paint. He understands business. But there's a lot of, again, nobody's going to come out of this looking totally clean. Jeremy sitting there saying, I'm offended in this, and then subtle needles, our friend, our confidential agreement, and then disclosing telephone conversations that they had, which I'm sure Crowder's not going to have the same memory of. The whole point is this public fight serves no one, and it should have been a negotiation. And at the end of the day, if Crowder thinks that the Daily Wire is a shill for the man, a shill for Wojcicki, a shill for whatever, that they compromise their conservative beliefs and message for soft censorship, there might have been other ways of doing it more effectively. And I think for Crowder, I mean, it's going to complicate anybody else's ability to deal, to negotiate with him on a going forward basis, because this is what he did to the Daily Wire without naming them. But I don't think that's much of a defense. It's going to be a red flag for anybody else. Will he do this to me in the future if he decides to impute ill intentions to my good faith negotiations? And if you don't think they're good faith negotiations, don't engage in negotiations with them. All right. And that's all I have to say about that. Public debating is very healthy, not outright fighting, in my belief. BKVQ, 100%. If you think that Ben Shapiro is deliberately censoring his voice to remain profitable, call him out on it. People have accused me of that. Oh, Viva, you called it the jibby jab. You called it the Rona. Why don't you just call it coronavirus? And I told you why. I'm not cutting off my nose to spite my face. Hey, it's great to yell into the corner of a room. It's also better just to play by the rules, which also illustrates how stupid they are, to keep the biggest access to the biggest platform, to amplify your message so that you can then drive people over to Rumble, Viva Frei, or over to Locals, vivabarneslaw.locals.com, where you could hear the other opinion coming from Barnes as well. James JK1234, $10 Rumble Round says, it isn't that Daily Wire is a shill. It's more of that when negotiating with industry leaders, you don't just start with non-starters. Crowder can just expose it, but it's a non-starter. Crowder can expose it once. Hey, James, this is the type of move. It's they say it's like the all-in in poker. It works every time except the last. Crowder can do this. He can expose it just once. Because everybody now going forward is going to know that this is how Crowder rolls if he decides he's been insulted by an offer. That's why, if I were behind closed doors with him, I'd say, don't. It's not how you do it. It's not going to make anyone look good, and it's certainly not going to serve your interests in the long run, unless now he's going to go build it on his own. Okay, let me see. The Blind Eye says, you don't get it either, bro. Leave YouTube, then they will follow you where you don't get canceled. I don't get it, bro. The Blind Eye, I get it, bro. Okay? I get it. And they will follow you, not if they don't know you exist. They'll follow you. Rumble is an amazing platform. It doesn't have 2 billion users. And the funny thing is, even from Rumble's perspective, they don't want their creators jumping ship from YouTube because that's where you go to market. I get it, bro. I hate being called bro, by the way. Just sorry. That was a pet peeve of mine. All right. I think we're done on that subject anyhow.